right, and on this week we're going to talk a little bit about verbal communication. So when we think about verbal communication, what we're really talking about is the use of language. So we're going to take some time and define what language is, and then we're going to look at how we create language. And we're going to dabble a little bit in semiotics, which is a whole nother comm study if you're interested in kind of looking at that. But not going to spend too much time there. So first of all, let's talk about what are we defining as verbal communication and language. So it's the way in which we use words and language to generate meaning. So typically when we are talking about verbal communication, we're talking about communicating verbally face-to-face, but we're also talking about written communication because that does use language. So think about text messages, think about email, think about social media. Those are all ways that we are communicating verbally. Sign language is also an example of verbal communication because it is a language. So even though you are not using words coming out of your mouth, it's still considered verbal communication because it is a structured language. So just something to kind of note there, that's something that commonly gets missed. So thinking about verbal communication and the way in which we use language, a lot of times where we get sort of caught up or maybe there is some miscommunication relates to that creation of meaning. While we might share a language, our meanings of different words might vary quite a bit. And later in the video, we'll talk about the two different ways that we define words using connotative and denotative meanings. So we think about language, again, it's a system of arbitrary signs and symbols. So we are the ones that put meaning into a language. And we'll talk a little bit how like the word chair, the C-H-A-I-R, we are the ones who have created meaning for that. Those combination of letters really don't have any meaning outside of the meaning we assign. So that's what we're thinking about when we think about language. It is an arbitrary system of signs and symbols. And again, we work to create meaning, so as you communicate across different languages, as you develop maybe your own sort of language with other people, so think about like siblings sometimes share a secret language as children. You are creating that meaning within that group. There are nearly 7,000 languages that exist in the world today, so there are lots of opportunities for miscommunication. So as we communicate in a broader world especially, we have lots of wonderful tools with the use of technology to help us better communicate, but we can still get lost a little bit. That is where nonverbal communication really helps out verbal communication. I might not be able to speak the same language as you, but I can probably still tell you my emotions or offer some sort of, sign or symbol that we can still communicate. And we'll look at that a little bit more in depth here in a minute. So the first thing is a sign. A sign stands for or represents something specific and often looks like the thing it represents. So in this case, I've given you some examples here. Even if you did not, so say we're in the US and English is our primary language. Even if you were not an English speaker, you could tell what is being communicated here by the picture, right? So you know that someone is walking across. That is a visual symbol. That is not something that is dependent on language here. We all can sort of discern what this means. Again, here a stoplight's coming up. We are able to, despite our native language, we're able to understand what that means. And here again, no swimming. I don't need to know English to understand that this is a no swimming zone. So whatever country I'm in, whatever language I speak, I'm able to discern the meaning because it looks like the thing that it represents. So sign stands for the thing that represents. Another great example would be sort of the choking symbol. Regardless of your language, this is a symbol that lets someone know that I am choking and I need help, right? So those are ways that we communicate that help us create sort of that common meaning. A symbol, on the other hand, does not have a direct relationship, okay? So a symbol does not have a direct relationship to the thing that it represents. It is what we have done to kind of take arbitrary letters and put them together to make a word. So for example, pedestrian walkway, stoplight ahead, and no swimming, the actual words are symbols, right? We have assigned those words meaning. If we take, I'm gonna steal a chair here. So if we take this lovely chair, the symbol of the word chair, so again, C-H-A-I-R, we have assigned that meaning. If, as English was being created and we decided to call this horse, and that's what we sat on was horse, then that's what we would call it. So the name doesn't actually have any meaning. We have assigned meaning to the name. And this is important as you start to break down and understand language. Here is what we call the triangle of meaning. And again, this is a very complex and detailed study in the field of communication, so we are just looking at sort of the tip of the iceberg. But essentially, studies have shown what your brain does is that it creates this triangle of meaning. So this is what your brain is doing as you're processing words and symbols. So we have the thought. So it's the mental process of connecting the symbol and the referent, which we're going to see down here. So again, we see something like the symbol, the word running. So depending on how you feel about running, your referent is going to be very different. I've put a picture of Homer Simpson down here. He looks like he is slogging through the last little bit of the marathon. But the referent is the thing or action that the word represents. So again, here is us running. We've got the word running, and then the thought is the process of putting those two things together. And that's where we assign some personal meaning here. Like if this is my visual image of running, then my thought process related to that word might be running is hard. Running is not something I enjoy. But if you are a marathoner and you run all the time, maybe running for you is freedom, right? Or running for you is sort of that time where you work out all of your thoughts and feelings. It's a very positive thing. So here is where we start to get into having different definitions of a word, right? So we take our own spin and we start to assign some meaning to that word that might be different than someone else's. And those two different definitions are called connotative definitions and denotative definitions. So denotative definitions, easy to remember this, D is for dictionary. So denotative is the dictionary definition. Essentially, it's the most commonly accepted definition in your particular culture. So it is cultural bound for sure, but it is sort of the objective dictionary definition of the word. And I've chosen the word dream here. Now, dream has two different denotative definitions. So it's either a series of thoughts, images, or sensations occur in a person's mind during sleep. So it's what happens when you go to sleep. Or it's something that you want to do. So you have a dream to do this particular thing. Or if you're Martin Luther King, his speech, I Have a Dream, he had a dream for what the world would look like if some of the things that he wanted to bring about came to fruition. So again, it is the commonly socially accepted definition. That's what we think of for denotative. Now, on the other hand, we also have connotative definitions of a word. These are sort of your personal definitions of that word. And in connotative definitions, we have thoughts, feelings, and emotions that go into our association with those words. So if we go back to the first denotative definition of dream, things that occur during sleep. Well, one of those, I sort of put my own connotative definitions, and you can see this beautiful picture here. Typically, if I dream, this is what I look like when I wake up. Dreams for me only happen when I'm very stressed out or anxious. So I have a very specific connotative definition of that word sort of dream, right? And it's sort of a negative connotative definition because I only dream, again, when I'm very anxious or stressed out. So if I dream at night, I end up looking like this. So that's my connotative definition. You might fall asleep like a baby, have great dreams, and it's a very peaceful thing for you. So that would be your connotative definition of dreams. And then again, if we're looking at sort of a goal, maybe your connotative definition of a dream is to have a particular house in a location, to have a family, to reach a particular status in a career. I put one here. One of my dreams is to complete the Appalachian Trail and hike the entire thing from start to finish. So that is a dream of mine, and again, just a connotative definition. So when someone says, think about some of your dreams, that would be something that I think of because that is one of my connotative definitions for that word. In class this week, one of the things that you're going to look at is looking at labels. And labels help us sometimes define ourselves, or they allow other people to sort of define us. And you will look at both a negative and a positive label that have been assigned to you, or you have assigned to yourself. And so one of the things I'm going to ask you to do is really think about, one, what is your connotative definition of that label? If someone says, oh, you're very responsible, well, that could be, people would generally think that's a positive thing. But I sometimes see responsible as maybe more of a negative connotative definition. In my family, I'm the first of 3 children. I have 2 sisters, and as the oldest child, I was always the quote-unquote responsible one. And while that can be a positive thing, it did impact the way that I sort of saw myself and my actions, right? So I never really went out on a limb. I kind of followed a very linear path. I worked multiple jobs. I was always the one who, was financially responsible and things like that. And that was great, but I also didn't take a lot of risks, right? My middle sister is the complete opposite. She was kind of labeled the wild child, or the adventurous one, and she went and lived in other countries. She has created her own sort of business, so she's really had this opportunity to do a lot of different things, maybe because she was sort of given that label of adventurous and really tried to live up to that. So again, it's not necessarily a positive or negative thing, but it does shape the way that we sort of think about ourselves and potentially the way we communicate with others. So that's what you're going to be looking at, is what are those labels, how have they impacted your view of self, and then how have they also impacted how you communicate with other people. So I'm looking forward to seeing what you have related to those labels and learning a little bit more about you this week.